The glaring fluorescent lights of Naval Station Coronado's maintenance bay cast harsh shadows across Elena Vasquez's weathered hands as she methodically disassembled an air conditioning unit. At 41, she moved with the precise economy of someone who had spent decades mastering efficiency of motion. Though she stood barely 5'5" with her steel-toed boots on, there was something in her posture, a certain alertness that never quite disappeared, even when performing the most mundane tasks. Most people at the base hardly noticed her. Just another figure in faded Navy coveralls with facilities management stitched above the pocket, her dark hair always neatly contained in a practical bun. She blended perfectly into the background noise of the bustling naval complex, exactly as she preferred. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena had been managing the West Wind maintenance operations for nearly 3 years now, overseeing the complex systems that kept the training facilities functioning through punishing San Diego summers and the constant wear imposed by thousands of naval personnel. Her paperwork listed her as a civilian contractor, retired Navy. Nothing remarkable, just one of hundreds of former service members who found their way into support roles after their time in uniform ended. This Monday morning was particularly busy. A weekend power surge had knocked out 2 of the climate control systems in the BUD-AS training complex where Navy SEAL candidates endured their legendary conditioning. With temperatures forecast to hit 94 degrees, getting those systems back online was the priority. Elena had already dispatched her 3-person team to other emergencies across the base while she tackled the SEAL compound herself. Systems should have been replaced years ago, she muttered to no one in particular, carefully laying out components on a canvas work mat. Her hands moved with surgical precision, each motion deliberate and economical. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The rhythm of technical work had always calmed her mind, provided structure and order when memories threatened to surface. The distinctive sounds of boots on concrete made Elena glance briefly toward the door. A group of young SEAL candidates in their distinctive brown t-shirts passed by, laughing about some shared joke. Their instructors followed a few paces behind, speaking in low tones. One of them, Chief Petty Officer Jackson, nodded briefly in Elena's direction. She acknowledged him with the slightest incline of her head before returning to her work. 3 years maintaining their facilities, and that was the extent of their interaction. Professional courtesy between people occupying entirely different worlds within the same complex, which was exactly how Elena wanted it. By mid-afternoon, she had the first system running again and was deep into diagnosing the second unit when her radio crackled. "Vasquez, we've got a leak in the advanced training classroom. How soon can you get there?" The voice belonged to her supervisor, Martinez. "Finishing critical repair at BUD-AS. Can divert Rodriguez from Building 8 if it's urgent," she replied. Voice calm and measured. "Negative. They specifically asked for you. Something about needing clearance for that section." Elena paused, hands hovering over the circuit board she'd been examining. The advanced training classrooms were where qualified SEALs received specialized instruction, often involving classified material. Her maintenance credentials allowed her access, but it was unusual for them to request her specifically. "Copy that. 30 minutes to secure here." After closing up the partially repaired unit, Elena gathered her tools and headed across the sprawling complex. The advanced training building stood apart from the others, newer, with additional security features and fewer windows. She swiped her ID at the entrance and nodded to the guard, who barely glanced up from his monitor. Following the room number Martinez had provided, she found herself in a classroom designed for small group tactical instruction. Maps and diagrams covered the walls, carefully arranged to reveal nothing sensitive to casual observation. At the front of the room, water streaked down from a discolored ceiling tile. "Maintenance," she called out, though the room appeared empty. "Back here." Came a reply from a connecting office. She found Commander David Reeves arranging plastic containers to catch water dripping from another compromised ceiling tile. He was in his late 40s, with the compact, powerful build common to long-serving special operators and the weathered face of someone who'd spent too many years in harsh environments. "Sorry to pull you from another job," he said, extending a hand. "David Reeves, advanced training." "Elena Vasquez," she replied, her handshake firm but brief. "Where's the source?" "HVAC condensation line backed up, I think. Happens every summer when the systems run overtime." Elena nodded, setting down her toolkit and moving a chair beneath the worst of the leaks. She climbed up to examine the ceiling tile, sliding it aside to reveal the space above. The commander was right. Condensation had built up and overflowed from a poorly insulated line. "Should be a quick fix," she said, pulling a small flashlight from her pocket and examining the joint where water had collected. "Take your time. We don't have this room scheduled again until tomorrow." Reeves leaned against the desk, watching her work with casual interest. "You been with base maintenance long?" 3 years, she answered, reaching up to adjust the insulation. Rapping, the motion caused her collar to shift slightly, revealing the edge of something dark at the nape of her neck. Just below her hairline, Reeves's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Mind if I ask where you served before facilities management?" "Navy, 15 years. Elena's answers remained efficient as her movements, offering nothing beyond what was directly asked. "What division?" She paused briefly, then continued working. "Communication support, primarily." "Interesting," Reeves said, his tone suggesting he found something genuinely curious about her answer. "Communication support personnel don't typically have Trident tattoos." Elena's hands stilled for just a moment. Before resuming their work, she said nothing, focusing intently on the leaking pipe. "Especially not ones with the Skunk Works insignia integrated into the design," he continued. "That's unusual, limited. Group would have that particular combination." The classroom fell silent except for the rhythmic dripping of water into plastic containers. Elena finished securing the insulation wrap and replaced the ceiling tile before climbing down from the chair. "Leaks fixed," she said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "Line should drain properly now." Reeves studied her face with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades reading people in high-stakes situations. "You know, I spent some time with the Integrated Maritime Units back in '09, Operation Neptune's Arrow." Elena collected her tools methodically, her expression giving away nothing. "I'll have maintenance send someone to replace those stained tiles tomorrow." "I was junior officer then," Reeves continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Had the privilege of working with a mixed team that included 2 female operators. Ghost program. They called it unofficially. Navy never acknowledged it existed, at least not publicly. Special skills integration before women were officially in combat roles." Elena shouldered her toolkit and headed for the door. "If that's all, Commander. 1 of them saved my life during an extraction gone sideways. Never knew her full name. Just Whiskey 7 in communications. Afterward, I heard the entire unit was absorbed into Skunk Works special projects, then officially disbanded in 2016. She paused at the doorway, her back to him. For several seconds, neither spoke. "Those ceiling tiles will need replacing," she finally said. "The moisture could lead to mold." Reeves nodded slowly. "Of course. Thank you for your prompt attention to our maintenance needs, Ms. Vasquez." As Elena walked back through the training complex, her pace measured and unhurried, she could feel something shift in the carefully constructed order of her world. For 3 years, she had maintained the perfect cover of invisibility, just another support staff member keeping the massive naval complex functioning. 3 years of quiet routine after walking away from a program that officially never existed. But Commander Reeves had recognized something in that brief glimpse of her tattoo. a specific design known only to a handful of operators from a classified program, the Navy's early experiment integrating women into special operations, before politics and policy caught up with battlefield realities. The program that had trained her to become a ghost, to move unseen through environments where women weren't supposed to be, to communicate and coordinate operations that would never appear in any official record. And now, after all her careful efforts to remain invisible, someone had finally seen her. The next morning, Elena arrived at the maintenance office 15 minutes earlier than usual. She preferred the quiet before the day shift fully assembled, when she could review work orders and assign tasks without interruption. But today, something felt different. As she entered the break room to pour her coffee, conversation between two of her team members abruptly ceased. "Morning," she said, voice neutral as she filled her standard-issue Navy mug. "Morning, boss," Rodriguez replied, a little too quickly. Phillips, the newest member of her team, was watching her with poorly disguised curiosity. Elena took her coffee and paperwork to her small office, closing the door with a quiet click. Through the window blinds, she could see her team exchanging glances. Word traveled fast on a naval base. Someone had heard something about her encounter with Commander Reeves. She focused on the day's work orders, methodically prioritizing emergency repairs and preventative maintenance. HVAC systems in the communications building, electrical issue in the women's barracks, plumbing backup in the galley. Normal problems with straightforward solutions, the kind she preferred. Her radio crackled just as she finished assigning the items. Day's tasks. "Vasquez, this is Martinez. Need you to swing by my office." Elena acknowledged the request and locked her work orders in the desk drawer. As maintenance supervisor, Carlos Martinez rarely summoned her unless there was a problem. She found him reviewing blueprints, his expression unreadable as she entered. "Close the door," he said without looking up. She complied, remaining standing until he gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Got a call from Commander Reeves this morning," Martinez began, studying her face. "Requested you specifically for some repairs in the SEAL training facilities." Elena maintained her composure. "I can add it to today's schedule." "That's not all." Martinez leaned back in his chair. "He mentioned your background. Said you might have relevant experience for a project they're working on." "I'm qualified for standard maintenance procedures," she replied evenly. Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Elena, I've been your supervisor for 3 years. Your personnel file says you were communications support. Reeves is suggesting you were something else entirely. My file is accurate." "Is it?" Martinez placed his hands flat on the desk. "Look, I don't need to know the classified details. But if there's something that makes you uniquely qualified for special projects on this base, I should know about it. Professionally speaking." Elena considered her options carefully. Martinez was a good supervisor, fair, competent, and not given to gossip. He'd served 20 years himself before moving to civilian management. "The commander misinterpreted something he saw," she said finally. "Nothing that affects my current position." Martinez studied her for a long moment. "All right. But he specifically requested you report to the SEAL training complex at 1300 today. Said it was about specialized maintenance requirements. That sound like something you can handle?" "Yes, good." He returned his attention to the blueprints. "Whatever this is about, Elena, just remember you're a valued member of my team. Has been since day one." She nodded once and left, aware that Martinez had just offered his support without pressing for details he wasn't entitled to know. It was the kind of professional courtesy that had made working under him tolerable, the exact opposite of the unwanted attention now heading her way. The morning passed in a blur of routine repairs. Elena deliberately chose tasks that kept her away from the more populated areas of the base, buying time to prepare for whatever awaited her at the SEAL complex. At precisely 1300, She arrived at the secured entrance, maintenance toolkit in hand. Guard checked her ID with more scrutiny than usual. "They're expecting you in the tactical planning room," he said, handing back her credentials. Elena made her way through familiar corridors, her footsteps silent from years of practice. Outside the tactical planning room, she paused, drawing a steady breath before knocking. "Enter," called a voice she recognized as Commander Reeves. She opened the door to find not just Reeves but 4 other men in naval uniforms, all with the unmistakable bearing of special operators. They turned to look at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. "Ms. Vasquez," Reeves said, stepping forward. "Thank you for coming. We have a rather unique maintenance situation." She surveyed the room quickly, noting nothing. "Obviously in need of repair. What seems to be the problem, Commander?" "Perhaps I should introduce everyone first," Reeves said. "This is Lieutenant Commander Harris, Chief Petty Officers Donovan and Wright, and Lieutenant Mercer. Gentlemen, this is Elena Vasquez from Facilities Management." The men nodded in acknowledgement, but their eyes held questions. Elena recognized the evaluation taking place, the assessment operators made when determining whether someone belonged in their planning space. "Ms. Vasquez," Reeves continued, "we're preparing for a training exercise that requires particular environmental conditions. Before we discuss specifics, I wonder if you might help settle something." Elena remained expressionless, though internally she felt her defenses rising. "Chief Donovan here doesn't believe a woman was ever integrated into maritime special operations prior to 2018. Would you care to enlighten him?" The room went silent. Elena met Reeves' gaze directly, her voice deliberately neutral when she finally spoke. "I'm here to address maintenance issues, Commander. Not to discuss military history or policy." Lieutenant Mercer, the youngest of the group, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, is this really necessary?" "I believe it is," Reeves replied, never taking his eyes off Elena. "Because we need someone with a specific skill set for this operation, and I think Ms. Vasquez has exactly what we're looking for." "With all due respect," Elena said quietly, "I'm a maintenance technician. If you need specialized military capabilities, you should be consulting active duty personnel." Chief Wright, who had been silently appraising her, suddenly spoke. "That tattoo on your neck, the Trident with the Skunk Works insignia. Only one unit ever used that marking." Elena's hand instinctively moved toward her collar, but she caught herself and returned it to her side. "Ghost Program," Wright continued. "Highly classified female integration experimental unit. 2008 to 2016. Never officially acknowledged." He turned to Donovan. "She's one of them." Donovan shook his head, unconvinced. "No offense, ma'am, but you're, what, 5'4", 130 pounds? The physical standards alone would be irrelevant for certain specialized roles." Lieutenant Commander Harris interrupted quietly. "Intel gathering, close quarters urban reconnaissance. Operations where being female was actually an advantage." "Exactly," Reeves confirmed. "The program wasn't about lowering standards. It was about recognizing that different body types and presentations could access environments that traditional operators couldn't." Elena remained perfectly still, the only indication of her discomfort being the slight tightening of her grip on her toolkit. "Ms. Vasquez hasn't confirmed any of this," Mercer pointed out. "She doesn't need to," Wright replied. "That tattoo is confirmation enough for anyone who knows what to look for." Elena had heard enough. "If there's no actual maintenance required, I should return to my scheduled repairs." "Wait," Reeves said, his tone shifting. "We actually do need your expertise, both kinds. We're planning an exercise involving environmental manipulation, creating specific conditions within the training facility that would replicate a scenario we might encounter. Your understanding of the building systems could be invaluable." "And the other expertise you're implying I have?" "The exercise includes Elements of exactly the kind of work your former unit specialized in. Reeves looked around the room. Work that these men need to understand better if they're going to be fully prepared for modern operational environments. Elena carefully placed her toolkit on the floor. Commander, my current position doesn't involve training consultation. No, but your contract doesn't prohibit it either. I checked. Reeves' expression softened slightly. Look, I'm not asking you to compromise any classified information. Just to help us design a realistic training scenario based on your knowledge of both the facility systems and certain operational realities. The room fell silent as everyone waited for her response. Elena felt the weight of their attention so different from the comfortable invisibility she'd cultivated for years. Part of her wanted to walk out, to return to the anonymity of maintenance work where no one asked questions about her past. But another part, one she'd tried to suppress since leaving the service, recognized the significance of what Reeves was requesting. I need to consult with my supervisor, she finally said. This would take me away from my assigned duties. Already handled, Reeves replied. Martinez has approved your temporary reassignment to special projects for up to 2 weeks, provided emergency repairs still take priority. Elena looked around the room at the men watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. For 3 years, she'd been invisible, just another support staff member keeping the massive naval complex functioning. Now, suddenly, she was being seen. Not just as a maintenance worker, but as someone with knowledge these elite operators needed. The exercise parameters, she said finally. What exactly are you trying to simulate? Reeves smiled, recognizing her implicit acceptance. Let's start with the building systems, and then we can discuss the rest. As they moved toward the planning table, Elena felt something shift inside her, the first crack in the wall she'd built between her past and present. After years of hiding in plain sight, she was about to step back into a world she'd left behind, if only as an advisor. The question was whether she could do so without compromising the quiet life she'd carefully constructed for the next 3 days. Elena found herself dividing her time between routine maintenance calls and increasingly complex meetings with Reeves' team. They had commandeered a rarely used storage facility adjacent to the training complex, converting it into a planning space for what they were calling Operation Ghostwalker, a name that made Elena uncomfortable with its obvious reference to her former unit. The objective, Reeves explained as they gathered around a detailed floor plan, is to create a training scenario that tests our team's ability to operate in environments where traditional advantages are neutralized. Elena studied. The diagram spread across the table. They had selected an abandoned administrative building on the far side of the base for their exercise. 3 stories of aging concrete with multiple entry points and complex internal architecture. You want to create an environment where physical strength becomes secondary to other skills, she observed. Exactly, Lieutenant Commander Harris nodded approvingly. Most of our training emphasizes direct approaches, force against force. But we're increasingly facing situations where that's not viable. Chief Donovan, still skeptical of Elena's credentials, crossed his arms. SEALs are already trained for stealth and infiltration. That's baseline stuff. Different kind of stealth. Elena said quietly, her eyes still on the building plans. You're trained to move unseen through hostile territory. But some environments require moving seen but unnoticed. There's a difference. The room fell silent as the men processed her words. Explain. Reeves prompted. Elena hesitated, then pointed to the building layout. Your standard approach would be to enter here or here, under cover of darkness, neutralize any opposition, secure your objective. But some scenarios don't allow for that option. Sometimes you need to hide in plain sight. Like what scenarios? Mercer asked, genuinely curious. Urban environments with civilian populations. Situations where opposition forces have overwhelming numerical advantage. Contexts where being identified as military personnel would compromise the mission. She traced a different path through the building. Sometimes the best approach is to appear to belong, Donovan snorted. Hard to make a 6-foot SEAL with 20 years of training appear to belong in most hostile environments. Elena met his gaze directly. Which is precisely why your understanding of these tactics needs expansion. The tension in the room shifted as the others recognized the implicit challenge in her words. Even Donovan seemed to reconsider his dismissal. The Ghost program, Wright said thoughtfully. It was about creating operators who could move through environments where traditional special forces would be immediately identified, wasn't it? Elena turned her attention back to the building plans, without confirming or denying his assessment. For this exercise, she said instead, I suggest focusing on 3 key elements: environmental manipulation, perception management, and asymmetric advantage. As she outlined her proposed modifications to the training scenario, Elena felt the familiar rhythm of operational planning returning, a mental process she had deliberately suppressed for years. Part of her was alarmed at how easily it resurfaced, while another part recognized the unique value she brought to this team of elite operators, who had never been trained to think like she had. By the end of the session, even Donovan was grudgingly engaged with her ideas. The plan had evolved into something far more sophisticated than their initial concept, a multi-layered exercise that would challenge teams to reconsider fundamental assumptions about operational approaches. This is innovative, Harris acknowledged. As they concluded, very different from our standard training protocols. Which is exactly what we need, Reeves added with satisfaction. As they packed up for the day, Mercer approached Elena hesitantly. Miss Vasquez, some of us are heading to the Anchor for drinks. It's a place off base where, I know what the Anchor is, she interrupted gently. It was the unofficial gathering spot for Naval Special Warfare personnel, not somewhere a maintenance worker would typically be invited. Right. Well, if you wanted to join us. Double. He left the invitation hanging awkwardly. Thank you, but I have other commitments. Elena gathered her notes methodically. I'll see you tomorrow for the equipment requisition meeting. As she left the building, Elena could feel the curious gazes of passing personnel. Word had spread quickly about her reassignment to the SEAL training project, generating speculation. That made her increasingly uncomfortable. The carefully constructed anonymity of the past 3 years was eroding rapidly. In the maintenance office, she found Martinez waiting with an expression of carefully contained curiosity. How's the special project? He asked as she collected her regular work orders. Progressing, she replied noncommittally. Martinez studied her for a moment. 2 officers from Naval Special Warfare Command stopped by this morning. Asked about your service record, Elena stilled. What did you tell them? That personnel matters go through proper channels. He paused. Elena, whatever this is about, whatever you did before, it's generating attention. Thought you should know. She nodded once, appreciating the warning. Thank you. That evening, instead of heading home to her small apartment near Imperial Beach, Elena drove to a quiet stretch of coastline north of the base. The secluded beach had become her thinking spot during the past 3 years, a place to decompress when memories threatened to surface. She sat on the sand, watching the Pacific swallow the setting sun, and considered her options. The training project with Reeves' team was stirring up exactly the kind of attention she'd spent years avoiding. Yet she couldn't deny a certain satisfaction in using skills that had lain dormant for so long, abilities honed through years of the most specialized training the military had never officially acknowledged. Her hand moved unconsciously to the back of her neck, fingers tracing the outline of the tattoo hidden beneath her collar. The modified Trident with the Skunk Works insignia, a marker that identified her to the handful of people who knew about the program's existence. Each of the 23 women who had passed through Ghost program training carried a variation of the same mark, a silent acknowledgement of their shared experience. A experience that had ended abruptly in 2016 when political winds shifted, and the program was officially concluded, its records sealed, its operators dispersed to conventional units or eased into separation from service. Elena had chosen the latter, trading covert operations for the straightforward problems of facility maintenance. Problems with clear solutions. Problems that didn't involve life or death decisions or the moral complexities of her former work. Sound of footsteps on sand pulled her from her thoughts. She tensed instinctively, scanning her surroundings without obvious movement, another habit from her previous life. "Thought that might be your truck in the parking area," said a familiar voice. Commander Reeves approached, still in uniform but with his collar loosened. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Mind if I join you?" Elena gestured to the sand beside her, maintaining her outward composure while inwardly reassessing the situation. This wasn't a coincidence. He had sought her out deliberately. "Beautiful spot," he commented, looking out at the darkening ocean. "Quiet. That's why I come here." They sat in silence for several minutes before Reeves spoke again. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally. "About why I'm pushing this training project, why I recognized your tattoo." Elena waited, her expression neutral. "That operation I mentioned, Neptune's arrow, the extraction that went sideways." He picked up a small shell, turning it over in his hands. "I was the junior officer who made a critical error in judgment, nearly got my entire team killed." The admission hung in the air between them. "We were pinned down in a village south of Kandahar. Surrounded, communications compromised. Then suddenly there was this ... presence. A woman who appeared out of nowhere, moving through the hostels like she was invisible. Created a diversion that allowed us to reach the extraction point." Elena kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, giving away nothing. Never knew her real name. Just her call sign Whiskey 7. Reeves looked directly at Elena. She had a tattoo visible just below her helmet when she moved. "Same design as yours." "Many military tattoos look similar," Elena said quietly. "Not that one." Reeves tossed the shell toward the water. "I spent years trying to understand how she did what she did. How she moved through that environment without being detected, despite being obviously American and female in a place where that combination should have made her immediately visible. That operation saved my life, but it also changed how I thought. About warfare," Reeves continued. "Made me realize we were training our people for the wrong scenarios, using outdated approaches." He turned to face Elena directly. "I've spent the last decade trying to evolve our training methodologies, but without access to the Ghost program's techniques, it's been like trying to reverse engineer something I only glimpsed once." Elena remained silent, weighing her response. Carefully. Confirming her identity meant acknowledging a past she deliberately buried. Denying it would be a lie they both knew was false. "What happened to Whiskey 7 after the extraction?" she finally asked. Reeves' expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Never found out. The whole incident was classified, redacted from official reports. When I tried to follow up through proper channels, I hit nothing but dead ends. It was like she never existed." The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, filling the silence between them. "Your training project," Elena said after a long pause. "What's the real objective? Officially? To enhance our team's capabilities in non-traditional environments." Reeves brushed sand from his uniform pants. "Unofficially? To preserve the knowledge and techniques of the Ghost program before they're lost completely. Those techniques were classified for a reason. Classifications change, operational needs evolve." He looked out at the darkening horizon. "The women who went through that program developed approaches we desperately need today. Approaches that could save lives." Elena stood, brushing sand. From her clothes, "I should go." "Elena," Reeves said, remaining seated but looking up at her. I'm not asking you to compromise security protocols or reveal classified information. I'm asking you to help prepare these operators for the reality of modern warfare by using my experiences as a template, by translating your expertise into training scenarios that will make them more effective and keep them alive. He paused. The world hasn't gotten less complicated since you left service. Elena stared out at the ocean, her expression unreadable in the fading light. I'll see you tomorrow at the planning session. She walked back toward the parking area, aware that she had neither confirmed nor denied his implicit identification. But they both knew the truth now hung between them, acknowledged, if not explicitly stated. The next morning brought new complications. Elena arrived at the base to find an unfamiliar officer waiting outside the maintenance office. A woman in her 50s with commander's insignia and the distinctive bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Ms. Vasquez?" the woman asked as Elena approached. "Commander Sharon Blackwood, Naval Special Warfare Command. Do you have a moment?" Elena felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the instinctive response to potential threat that years of training had ingrained. Of course. They walked to a small conference room in the administrative building, neither speaking until the door closed behind them. "I understand you've been consulting on a training project with Commander Reeves' team," Blackwood began without preamble. "Yes, ma'am." Facilities expertise for environmental modifications. Blackwood's expression remained neutral. "Ms. Vasquez, let's not waste each other's time. I know exactly who you are and what your service record actually contains." Elena maintained her composure, though internally her mind raced through potential responses and escape routes, another automatic reaction from her previous life. "Your record is impressive," Blackwood continued. 4 deployments with the Ghost program, specialized in urban infiltration and intelligence gathering. Recipient of commendations that officially don't exist. "Those records are sealed," Elena said quietly. "I have the clearance." Blackwood leaned forward slightly. "What interests me is why someone with your background chose to become a maintenance technician after separation. Simple problems with clear solutions." Blackwood studied her for a moment. "Fair enough. But now Commander Reeves has pulled you back into a world you deliberately left. I need to know if that's going to be a problem. For whom? For you, for the program, for the operators who will be training under scenarios you helped design." Blackwood's expression softened slightly. "Elena, I was the commanding officer for the Ghost program's final phase. I know what you and the others went through. I also know why some of you chose to disappear afterward." Elena felt her carefully constructed defenses wavering. Blackwood wasn't just any officer. She had been the architect of the program's most advanced training, the woman who had transformed 23 female operators into ghosts, capable of moving through environments where conventional special forces couldn't operate. "Commander, Reeves doesn't know everything," Elena said carefully. "No, he doesn't. But he knows enough to recognize the value of what you learned." Blackwood placed a folder on the table. "I've been authorized to offer you a more formal role in this training initiative. I have a job." "You have a cover," Blackwood corrected gently. "One that served its purpose but is no longer necessary." Elena glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A civilian contractor position. Special advisor to Naval Special Warfare Training Command." Blackwood tapped the folder. 6-month initial term. Developing and implementing training protocols based on Ghost program methodologies, adapted for current operational requirements. "And if I decline?" "Then you continue as a maintenance technician and we find another approach." Blackwood's tone remained neutral. "This isn't an order, Elena. You've fulfilled your service obligation. But it is an opportunity to ensure that what you and the others learned doesn't disappear." Elena finally reached for the folder, opening it to scan the contents. The position description was carefully worded to avoid explicitly mentioning classified programs, while clearly indicating the nature of the expertise required. "Why now?" she asked, looking up from the documents. "The Ghost program ended 7 years ago. Because the operational landscape has changed. Because we're facing adversaries who don't engage in conventional warfare. Because we've lost operators to situations they weren't properly prepared for." Blackwood paused. "And because David Reeves has been pushing for this kind of training evolution for years, but couldn't access the right expertise until he recognized your tattoo." Elena closed the folder, her decision not yet formed but taking shape. "I need time to consider, of course. Take 48 hours. Blackwood stood. "One more thing, whatever you decide, your previous service record remains classified. This position would involve teaching methodologies, not revealing operational details." After Blackwood left, Elena sat alone in the conference room, the folder resting on the table before her. For 3 years, she had deliberately constructed a life devoid of the complexities and moral ambiguities of her former work. Maintenance problems were straightforward, broken systems that could be fixed with the right tools and knowledge. But people weren't systems. The operators training for deployment couldn't be fixed with conventional approaches, when the warfare they faced was increasingly unconventional. The knowledge she carried, knowledge gained through a program that had pushed boundaries, both operationally and politically, might make the difference between mission success and failure. Between survival and death. Her radio crackled, pulling her from her thoughts. "Vasquez, this is Martinez. Got an electrical issue in Building 7 when you're available. Copy that. On my way." Elena tucked the folder into her bag and headed toward her regular duties, aware that her carefully constructed world of anonymity was crumbling around her. The question was no longer whether her past would remain hidden, but how she would integrate it into her future. The abandoned administrative building had been transformed over the past week. What had once been empty offices and dust-covered corridors now featured a complex array of surveillance equipment, environmental controls, and training obstacles. Elena walked through this space with Commander Reeves and Chief Donovan, inspecting the modifications she had helped design. "Temperature controls are operational," she noted, checking the tablet that displayed the building's systems. "We can simulate everything from desert heat to Arctic conditions on different floors." "And the visibility modifications?" Reeves asked. Elena tapped the tablet, dimming the lights in one section while increasing them to harsh brightness in another. "Variable lighting throughout, plus smoke generation, sound projection, and selective communication dead zones." Donovan ran his hand along a newly installed wall panel. "All this fancy tech is impressive, but I'm still not convinced it addresses the fundamental training objectives." "The technology isn't the point," Elena replied. "It's the psychological impact of rapidly changing environmental conditions. The uncertainty creates stress that affects decision-making. My guys train under stress all the time. Different kind of stress." Elena met his skeptical gaze directly. "You train them to endure physical discomfort, to perform under fire, to maintain unit cohesion during chaotic operations. This is about functioning effectively when the environment itself becomes an active opponent." Reeves intervened before Donovan could respond. "The first training session is tomorrow. Full team deployment, running the scenario we developed. Elena will observe from the control room." "With all due respect, Commander," Donovan said, "observation is one thing, but I'm not comfortable having a civilian making real-time assessments of my operator's performance." Elena's expression remained neutral, though internally she noted the irony of being labeled civilian when discussing tactics she had executed in environments far more hostile than this controlled training scenario. "Chief," Reeves replied with careful patience, "Ms. Vasquez isn't just observing. She's actively managing the environmental variables throughout the exercise. That's the whole point, creating an unpredictable scenario that forces adaptive response. Donovan looked unconvinced. Sir, I've been training SEAL teams for 15 years. The fundamentals haven't changed, haven't they? Elena asked quietly. When was the last time your team operated in an environment where physical superiority provided no advantage? Where conventional tactics were not just ineffective, but actively counterproductive? The question hung in the air between them. Donovan's expression hardened, but before he could respond, Lieutenant Mercer appeared at the doorway. Teams assembled in the briefing room, sir, he reported, ready for the pre-exercise orientation. As they walked toward the briefing area, Elena felt the familiar tension that preceded operational deployment, a heightened awareness that she had deliberately suppressed for 3 years. Part of her resented its return, while another part recognized it as an essential state of mind for what lay ahead. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The briefing room fell silent as she entered behind Reeves and Donovan. 12 SEAL operators, all male, all carrying the unmistakable physical presence of elite warriors, turned to look at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright dismissal. Gentlemen, Reeves began, this is Elena Vasquez. She's designed the environmental parameters for tomorrow's exercise and will be controlling the variables throughout your deployment. A muscular operator with staff sergeant stripes leaned toward his teammate, whispering something that made both men smirk. Elena pretended not to notice, keeping her focus on Reeves as he outlined the exercise parameters. Your objective is simple. Locate and retrieve 3 intelligence packages hidden within the structure while evading opposition forces. Standard extraction mission. What's the catch? Asked one of the operators. The environment will be actively working against you, Reeves explained. Conditions will change without warning. Communication protocols will be unreliable. And the opposition force has been specifically trained to counter your standard tactical approaches. Who's playing opposition? Another team member asked. Security. Personnel from Naval Intelligence, Reeves replied. Selected for specific characteristics. Elena noted his careful wording. The opposition force would consist primarily of smaller-built individuals, including several women, specifically chosen because they presented a different profile than the opponent's SEALs typically trained against. As the briefing continued, Elena observed the team's reactions. Most seemed to view the exercise as just another training evolution, perhaps unusual in its parameters, but nothing that would seriously challenge operators of their caliber. Their confidence was palpable, bordering on dismissive. Only one, a quiet lieutenant with watchful eyes, seemed to recognize that something fundamentally different was being presented. He studied the building schematics with unusual intensity, occasionally glancing at Elena with thoughtful consideration rather than the dismissal shown by his teammates. After the briefing concluded, this operator approached her as the others filed out. Lieutenant Jason Cahoe, he introduced himself. Mind if I ask a question about the environmental controls? Go ahead. You mentioned targeted disruption of communication systems, he said. Are we talking about random outages or deliberately timed interruptions keyed to our movement patterns? Elena studied him for a moment. What do you think? A faint smile crossed Cahoe's face. I think if I were designing this exercise to be maximally effective, I'd monitor team communications and selectively disrupt them at critical decision points. Interesting. Theory. Is it just a theory? Elena maintained her professional demeanor. Tomorrow's exercise will provide practical answers, Lieutenant. As she gathered her materials, Commander Blackwood entered the room, nodding briefly to Cahoe as he departed. The 2 women waited until they were alone before speaking. Impressions? Blackwood asked. They're approaching this as a standard tactical exercise with unusual conditions, Elena replied. Not as a fundamentally different operational paradigm. Exactly. The mindset we need to disrupt, Blackwood smiled slightly. Are you ready for tomorrow? Elena considered the question carefully. The past week had been a gradual re-immersion into a world she had deliberately left behind, the world of operational planning, tactical assessment, and the unique perspective her Ghost program training had provided. Despite her initial reservations, she found herself increasingly engaged with the challenge of translating those experiences into training protocols that might save lives. Yes, she said finally, I'm ready. What she didn't say, what she wasn't sure Blackwood would understand was that readiness came with a cost. Each step back toward her former life eroded the careful boundaries she had constructed between then and now, between the ghost she had been and the maintenance technician she had become. From the control room, Elena watched 12 of the Navy's most elite operators deploy into the training facility. Multiple screens displayed their movements through the building's standard tactical formation, methodical room clearing, disciplined communication protocols, everything by the book. Everything. Predictable. She waited until they reached the second floor before initiating the first environmental shift. With a few taps on her console, the temperature in the east wing dropped 15 degrees while humidity levels spiked. Simultaneously, she activated selective signal jamming, cutting communication between the point team and their rear security. What are you doing? Chief Donovan asked from his position behind her chair. Creating decision pressure, Elena replied without taking her eyes off the monitors. They're moving like they're in complete control of the environment. They're not. On screen, the team's methodical progress faltered as the point man realized his radio communications had failed. Hand signals replaced verbal commands, slowing their advance. Elena noted the time elapsed 17 seconds to adapt. Not bad, but not good enough for the scenarios they might face. Commander Reeves and Blackwood observed silently from the back of the control room as Elena continued manipulating the building's systems. When the team approached the first intelligence package, she flooded the corridor with dense, white smoke while simultaneously raising the ambient noise level to make verbal communication nearly impossible. This is beyond standard environmental challenges, Donovan protested. You're actively sabotaging their approach. Yes, Elena agreed simply. Because that's what real-world operations increasingly involve, environments that actively work against conventional tactics. On screen, the SEAL team had paused to regroup, clearly struggling with the rapidly changing conditions. Their training emphasized adaptation, but within parameters that assumed certain constants Elena was deliberately removing. Look at their formation, she noted, pointing to one of the monitors. Still maintaining traditional spacing and security. Positions despite limited visibility. Still moving as if physical dominance is their primary advantage. Lieutenant Commander Harris leaned forward with interest. What would you do differently? Change everything, Elena replied. Formation, movement patterns, even the fundamental approach. She tapped a command sequence, activating directional sound projectors that simulated movement in the corridor behind the team. On screen, the operators reacted immediately, spinning to address the perceived threat to their rear. The maneuver was textbook perfect and completely unnecessary. Valuable seconds ticked away as they secured an empty corridor while the actual opposition force moved into position elsewhere. They're responding exactly as trained, Elena explained, which makes them predictable to anyone who understands their protocols. 4 hours into the exercise, the SEAL team had recovered only one of the 3 intelligence packages. They had encountered the opposition force multiple times, prevailing through superior tactical skills, but taking longer than their mission parameters allowed. Elena had continually adjusted the environment, alternating between extreme heat and cold, manipulating light levels, creating zones of sensory confusion where normal orientation became impossible. "They're starting to fatigue," Harris observed. "Not physically," Elena corrected. "Mentally. They're questioning their approach but don't have an alternative framework." All except Lieutenant Kehoe. Elena had been watching him with particular interest as the exercise progressed. While the rest of the team continued applying standard tactics with increasing frustration, Kehoe had begun experimenting with different movement patterns, separating briefly from the group to test environmental boundaries, adapting his approach based on observed results rather than training doctrine. "That one's thinking differently," Blackwood noted, following Elena's gaze to Kehoe's monitor. "He recognized the paradigm shift from the beginning," Elena agreed. "But he's constrained by team protocols." As if to illustrate her point, Kehoe rejoined his unit after another solo exploration, attempting to explain something to his team leader. The conversation appeared tense, with the leader eventually cutting Kehoe off with a sharp hand gesture. "They're not listening to him," Reeves observed. "Because his suggestions contradict their training," Elena replied. "He's proposing a fundamentally different approach, and they're not ready to abandon what they know." She initiated the final phase of the exercise complete communication blackout, combined with rapid environmental shifts every 90 seconds. On screen, the SEAL team's frustration became increasingly evident as their practice coordination broke down in the face of constantly changing conditions. "This is where it gets interesting," Elena said quietly. The team had split into 3 elements to locate the final intelligence, packaged as a standard approach for covering more ground. Elena focused on Kehoe's 3-man element, watching as they approached a section she had specifically designed to neutralize conventional tactics. The corridor they entered appeared normal, but Elena had modified it to amplify sound from certain positions while completely dampening it from others. Standard hand signals became useless when team members couldn't maintain visual contact through the manipulated light levels. Kehoe paused, visibly reassessing the situation. Then, instead of pushing forward according to protocol, he did something unexpected. He deliberately separated from his teammates, moving into what appeared to be a more exposed position. "What is he doing?" Donovan asked incredulously. "Breaking formation in hostile territory is basic failure." "Watch," Elena replied. Kehoe positioned himself precisely where Elena had created a sound-dampening pocket. From there, he could observe both the corridor ahead and his teammates behind, while remaining virtually undetectable to the opposition force approaching from an adjoining room. When the opposition entered the corridor, they moved past Kehoe without noticing him, focusing instead on his more visible teammates. "He's using the environment against the opposition," Blackwood said with approval. "He's thinking like a ghost," Elena corrected, recognizing that sometimes visibility is an advantage if you control how you're perceived. The exercise concluded after 6 hours. The SEAL team had recovered 2 of the 3 intelligence packages, technically a mission failure by their standards. As they assembled for debriefing, Elena noted their expressions of frustrated confusion. These were men accustomed to succeeding through superior training, physical capability, and tactical discipline. The exercise had deliberately undermined those advantages, forcing them to confront operational parameters they weren't equipped to navigate. "They look pissed," Harris observed. "Good," Elena replied. "Comfort is the enemy of adaptation." In the debriefing room, tension radiated from the operators as Reeves outlined the exercise results. Elena stood quietly at the back, observing the team's reactions. Most displayed the controlled frustration of elite performers confronting unexpected failure. A few, including the team leader, directed barely concealed resentment toward her, the civilian who had designed their humbling experience. Only Kehoe seemed genuinely thoughtful rather than frustrated, occasionally nodding as Reeves explained the purpose behind specific environmental manipulations. The opposition force anticipated your movement patterns with 82% accuracy, Reeves concluded. In a real-world operation, that percentage would translate to mission failure and potential casualties. With respect, sir, the team leader responded. The conditions were artificially manipulated to guarantee that outcome. No realistic scenario would include that level of environmental interference. Elena stepped forward. Tell that to the 3 teams that failed extraction in CAFG last year because they couldn't adapt to urban environments where their communications were compromised and their physical superiority provided no tactical advantage. The room fell silent. It was the first time Elena had referenced actual operations, and the specificity of her example caught everyone's attention. The opposition knew your playbook, she continued. Not because they had inside information, but because you move, communicate, and react according to established patterns. Patterns that worked perfectly in the environments you were designed to dominate, but fail catastrophically in environments designed to neutralize those very advantages. The debriefing room remained silent for several tense seconds after Elena's statement. The team leader's expression hardened, while others exchanged uncertain glances. How would you know about CAFG? One of the operators finally asked. That operation isn't in any briefing materials available to civilian contractors. Another added. Commander Reeves stepped forward before Elena could respond. Ms. Vasquez has relevant operational experience and appropriate clearances. That's all you need to know for this training evolution. With respect, Commander, the team leader said. If we're being evaluated by someone, we deserve to know their qualifications. Lieutenant Kehoe, who had remained quiet until now, leaned forward. The tattoo on her neck. It's not decorative, is it? The room's attention shifted entirely to Elena. She maintained her composed expression, though internally she recognized the moment for what it was, the final dissolution of her carefully constructed anonymity. Ghost program, Kehoe continued, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the silent room. I heard rumors during my first deployment. Female operators integrated into special operations years before it was officially acknowledged. Specialized in environments where traditional tactical advantages were neutralized. Elena met his gaze without confirming or denying. That's why this exercise was designed the way it was, Kehoe concluded. You're not testing our standard protocols. You're demonstrating their limitations in the exact scenarios where your unit was designed to operate. Chief Donovan, who had been skeptical throughout, studied Elena with newfound consideration. If that's true, then today's failure wasn't just about our performance, it was about perspective. Every tactical approach has environments where it excels and environments where it fails, Elena acknowledged. Your training optimizes you for direct action scenarios where overwhelming force, superior technology, and physical dominance determine outcomes. And yours? The team leader asked, his hostility slightly tempered by curiosity. Different parameters, different metrics for success. Elena moved to the central display, bringing up the building schematic. Let me show you what you missed. For the next 30 minutes, she walked them through the exercise from her perspective, highlighting decision points where their training had led them into predictable patterns, showing how the opposition force had anticipated their movements, demonstrating how environmental factors had been manipulated to neutralize their advantages. The third intelligence package was never recoverable using your standard approach, she explained, highlighting a section of the building. The environmental conditions were specifically designed to make conventional tactics not just ineffective but counterproductive. So it was rigged against us, one operator muttered. It was designed to fail a specific type of approach, Elena corrected. Just as certain real-world environments are inherently hostile to conventional special operations tactics. She turned to Kehoe. Lieutenant, you adapted differently than your teammates. Walk us through your thinking when you separated from your element in the East Corridor. Kehoe straightened slightly, unused to being singled out. The environmental manipulations created patterns, not random changes, but specific configurations of light, sound, and temperature. I realized they formed what amounted to channels, I guess. Paths of advantage if you positioned yourself correctly. Exactly. Elena nodded with approval. The environment wasn't just an obstacle to overcome. It was a tool that could be leveraged if you understood its properties. As the debriefing continued, Elena noted a subtle shift in the room's dynamics. The outright dismissal had transformed into reluctant attention. These were elite operators, men who had survived the most demanding selection and training processes in the military. Their excellence was unquestioned in their domain. But excellence created its own blind spots, and those blind spots could be fatal in environments that didn't conform to training parameters. Tomorrow, she concluded, we run the exercise again. But this time, I want you to approach it from a fundamentally different perspective. Stop trying to dominate the environment and start looking for ways to become part of it. As the team filed out, Commander Blackwood approached Elena. Effective demonstration, though perhaps more confrontational than necessary. They needed to feel the failure, Elena replied. Intellectual understanding isn't enough for operators at this level. They need to experience the limitations of their approach before they can genuinely consider alternatives. And you? How does it feel to step back into this world? Elena considered the question carefully. The past 8 hours had reactivated operational instincts she'd deliberately suppressed for years. The hyper-awareness, the constant tactical assessment, the mental calculation of variables and outcomes, all had returned with disturbing ease, as if the maintenance technician had been nothing more than a thin disguise over her true operational self. Complicated, she finally answered. I left this behind for a reason. Yet you're naturally effective in this role, Blackwood observed. These men have already learned more from one failed exercise than from months of conventional training. Outside the debriefing room, Elena found Lieutenant Kehoe waiting. His expression was thoughtful rather than confrontational. The Ghost program, he said without preamble. It wasn't just about having female operators who could access different environments. It was about fundamentally different tactical thinking. Wasn't it? Elena studied him for a moment. What makes you say that? Because today you didn't just change the conditions. You changed the paradigm. He paused. I'd like to learn more if you're willing to teach. Over the next 2 weeks, Elena's role evolved from environmental controller to active instructor. What had begun as a limited consultation on a single training exercise had transformed into a specialized course on what Commander Reeves was now calling asymmetric operational adaptation. The 12 operators from the initial exercise had been joined by 8 more, specially selected for their adaptability and open-minded approach to tactical evolution. Each morning began in a Spartan classroom where Elena systematically deconstructed conventional special operations doctrine, not to dismiss it, but to highlight its contextual limitations. Each afternoon, the operators rotated through practical exercises in the modified training facility, where environmental manipulation forced them to abandon ingrained responses and develop new approaches. The fundamental problem, Elena explained, as the group gathered for their 3rd week of training, is that your standard protocols were developed for environments where you hold multiple advantages: superior firepower, advanced technology, extensive support infrastructure, physical dominance. But increasingly, you're being deployed to environments specifically designed to neutralize those advantages. Lieutenant Kehoe, who had emerged as the most receptive student, leaned forward. Urban settings with civilian populations. Digital environments where communications are compromised, added another operator. Politically sensitive locations where direct action is prohibited, offered a third. Elena nodded. All examples of operational contexts where conventional approaches fail not because of poor execution, but because the underlying assumptions no longer apply. She brought up images on the main display, surveillance photos of urban environments. Complex interior spaces, crowded public settings. These are the battlefields where traditional special operations teams struggle. Not because you lack capability, but because your capability is optimized for different parameters. So what's the alternative? Asked Chief Donovan, who had gradually shifted from skepticism to grudging interest. We can't exactly change our physical profile or training background. No, Elena agreed, but you can change your operational paradigm. She moved to the center of the room. Today we're going to focus on presence manipulation, controlling how you're perceived in environments where you can't avoid being seen. For the next hour, she outlined techniques that had been core to Ghost program training methods for altering. Physical presentation, movement patterns that minimized attention, psychological approaches to perception management. Techniques that allowed operators to be visible without being noticed, to control how observers categorized and responded to their presence. This isn't about disguise in the traditional sense, she emphasized. It's about understanding how humans process visual and behavioral information, what triggers attention and what doesn't. In the afternoon practical session, Elena divided the operators into small teams and assigned each a different approach to moving through the training facility. Some were instructed to use standard tactical movement, others to apply the perception management techniques she had outlined. From the control room, she tracked their progress while manipulating environmental conditions and directing the opposition. Force a mix of security personnel specifically briefed to watch for conventional tactical indicators. Notice the difference, she pointed out to Reeves and Blackwood as they observed the exercise. Team 1 is moving according to standard protocols, clearing corners, maintaining tactical spacing, scanning for threats. Textbook perfect. On an adjacent screen, Kehoe's team moved differently, their spacing irregular, their posture less overtly vigilant, their progress less methodical, but ultimately more effective at avoiding detection. They're still executing the same mission, Elena explained, but with a completely different approach to presence. Team 1 is trying not to be seen. Team 2 is controlling how they're seen. By the end of the exercise, the results were unambiguous. The teams using modified approaches had significantly higher success rates in avoiding detection and completing objectives, despite having received only minimal training in the new techniques. During the debriefing, Elena noted a fundamental shift in the operator's receptiveness. The initial resistance had given way to professional curiosity as empirical results demonstrated the value of her approach. These were, after all, pragmatists at their core, interested less in doctrinal purity than in what actually worked. The point isn't to replace your existing tactical toolkit, she emphasized as the session concluded. It's to expand it, to give you options when conventional approaches are compromised by environmental factors. As the group dispersed, Commander Blackwood pulled Elena aside. The formal offer still stands. This 2-week training evolution has clearly demonstrated the value of your expertise. Elena watched the operators filing out, noting how differently they moved now compared to 2 weeks ago. Subtle changes in awareness and physical presentation that indicated the beginnings of a perceptual shift. I'll consider it, she replied. Later. That evening, Elena found herself alone in the training facility, reviewing data from the day's exercises. The quiet after hours of intensive instruction provided space to reflect on how completely her life had changed in the week since Commander Reeves had recognized her. The maintenance technician identity she had carefully constructed was effectively gone. In its place was something neither fully civilian nor military. Its place was something neither fully civilian nor military. Hybrid role that drew on her classified operational background while translating it into transferable knowledge. Thought I might find you here, said a voice from the doorway. Lieutenant. Kehoe entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Elena. Black, right? I noticed during the morning sessions. She accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "Reviewing your team's performance today. Impressive adaptation rate. We had a good instructor." Kehoe leaned against the adjacent desk. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question. Why maintenance? After everything you must have done in the Ghost program, why choose to repair air conditioners and fix leaky pipes?" Elena considered Kehoe's question, her gaze fixed on the training data displayed across multiple screens. For a moment, it seemed she might deflect with her usual professional detachment. Instead, she set down her coffee and turned to face him directly. "Maintenance problems have clear parameters," she said finally. "A broken system presents observable symptoms. You diagnose the issue, apply the appropriate solution, and verify functionality. Success or failure is immediately apparent and objectively measurable. Unlike covert operations," Kehoe observed. "Unlike people," Elena corrected. "In my previous work, success was often a matter of perspective. Lives saved or lost. Intelligence gathered or missed. Objectives achieved, but at what cost?" She gestured toward the facility around them. "A repaired air conditioning system doesn't leave you wondering if you made the right decision." Kehoe nodded slowly, processing her response. "The certainty of it, the simplicity," Elena clarified. "When the Ghost program was dissolved in 2016, we were given options. Transition to conventional units, move to intelligence roles, or separation with appropriate cover identities. I chose the path that would provide the most distance from ... complexity. Yet here you are, teaching us how to navigate exactly that kind of complexity." Elena's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her eyes, an unintended detour. "Is it though?" Kehoe set his coffee down and leaned forward slightly. "You could have refused when Reeves approached you. Could have denied your background, maintained your cover, kept fixing broken systems." "Perhaps I recognized a different kind of broken system," she replied, glancing at the screens displaying the day's training data, "one that couldn't be fixed with standard tools." Their conversation was interrupted by Commander Reeves entering, with Lieutenant Commander Harris. Both men carried tablets displaying what appeared to be mission briefing materials. "Glad you're both here," Reeves said, his expression unusually tense. "We have a situation that may require your input." Harris activated the main display, bringing up satellite imagery of what appeared to be a coastal industrial facility. "We've received intelligence about a potential hostage scenario developing at the Miramar Research Station. 2 American scientists being held by an unidentified group. That's less than 30 miles from here," Kehoe noted. "Which is why Naval Special Warfare has been tasked with developing contingency response options," Reeves explained. "The complication is the nature of the facility itself." Elena studied the imagery with practiced assessment. Urban setting, civilian presence, multiple access points with unknown security measures, limited intelligence on interior layout. "Exactly," Harris confirmed. "Standard tactical approach would be problematic given the environmental constraints." Reeves turned to Elena. "We're not asking you to participate in any operational capacity, just to review the preliminary planning and provide perspective based on your ... specialized experience." Elena understood the unspoken request. They wanted her to evaluate the scenario through the lens of Ghost program methodologies to identify the limitations of conventional approaches and suggest alternatives that might minimize risk. "Show me what you have so far," she said. For the next hour, they reviewed the limited intelligence available. The research station was a mixed-use facility, part laboratory, part manufacturing center, with approximately 60 civilian personnel normally present. The hostage situation had developed after hours, with only security staff and a few researchers on site when the facility was breached. Initial tactical assessment suggests a direct approach would create unacceptable risk to the hostages, Harris explained. Too many unknown variables, too many potential points of failure. Elena methodically analyzed the facility schematics, identifying vulnerabilities and opportunities that the others had missed. Her assessment wasn't based on the standard tactical considerations, but on the unique perspective developed through Ghost program training, seeing pathways where others saw obstacles, advantages where others saw limitations. "You're approaching. This is a conventional hostage extraction," she observed. "But the environmental parameters don't support that methodology. What's the alternative?" Kehoe asked. Elena began outlining a different approach. Not a direct assault, but a progressive infiltration strategy that would leverage the facility's existing systems and personnel. Movements to insert operators without triggering hostile response. "The objective isn't to overcome the opposition through superior force," she explained. "It's to establish presence within the controlled environment before the opposition recognizes the intervention." As she detailed the approach, Elena felt a familiar mental shift, the maintenance technician receding as operational instincts resurfaced. Her analysis became increasingly precise, drawing on experiences she had deliberately avoided recalling for years. "This approach," Reeves said when she had finished, "it's similar to what you described from the CAFG operation, isn't it?" "Similar principles," Elena acknowledged. "Different application." Harris studied her with newfound respect. "I need to bring this to the planning team immediately. This perspective. It changes our entire approach." After Harris departed, Reeves turned to Elena with a serious expression. "I want to be clear about something. Your role here remains advisory only. I'm not attempting to draw you back into operational status. I understand. But," he continued, "your insights may directly impact the safety of both the hostages and the operators deployed to extract them. That's why I asked for your perspective." Kehoe, who had been silently absorbing the exchange, addressed Elena directly. "When you described maintenance problems as having clear parameters and immediate verification of success or failure, this situation has neither. Yet you just provided the clearest assessment I've heard." Elena met his gaze. "Some skills remain, regardless of how long they've been set aside." As Reeves departed to join the planning team, Kehoe remained, his expression thoughtful. "The Ghost program," he said after a moment. "It wasn't just about putting women in special operations roles, was it? It was about fundamentally different tactical thinking. It was about recognizing that conventional approaches fail in unconventional environments." Elena replied, "Gender was relevant only because it created operators who couldn't rely on the traditional advantages of physical dominance or intimidation. We had to develop different methodologies because the standard toolkit wasn't available to us. And now you're teaching us those methodologies," Kehoe observed, "because the environments we're facing increasingly neutralize our traditional advantages." Elena looked at the facility schematics still displayed on the main screen, recognizing the implications of her involvement. The maintenance technician identity had provided simplicity and certainty, a life without the moral complexities and high-stakes decisions of her former work. But simplicity came at a cost, both to herself and to those who might benefit from the knowledge she carried. Dawn broke over Naval Station Coronado as Elena entered the Tactical Operations Center. She had spent the night reviewing the Miramar facility schematics, identifying entry points and movement patterns that conventional assessment had overlooked. Now, as the official planning team assembled, she found herself in an unexpected position, neither fully insider nor outsider, but somewhere in between. "Ms. Vasquez," Commander Reeves greeted her, gesturing toward a seat at the planning table. "We've incorporated your infiltration strategy into the operational proposal. The team has some questions about implementation details." For the next 2 hours, Elena worked with the planning group, translating Ghost program methodologies into tactics for conventional operators. Her approach emphasized environmental adaptation over force projection using the facilities. Existing patterns and systems to establish presence before the opposition could recognize the intervention. The key difference, she explained, pointing to the facility's ventilation access points, is that we're not treating the civilian infrastructure as an obstacle to overcome. We're treating it as a pathway to leverage. Lieutenant Kehoe, who had been added to the planning team based on his performance in Elena's training sessions, nodded in understanding. Moving with the environment rather than against it. Exactly. The opposition expects a conventional approach: perimeter breach, direct confrontation, hostage extraction under fire. They've prepared for that scenario. Elena highlighted several points on the facility schematic. But they're not prepared for operators who enter using maintenance protocols, who move according to expected facility patterns, who establish position before revealing presence. As the planning concluded, Commander Blackwood pulled Elena aside. The extraction team deploys in 4 hours. I know your advisory role doesn't extend to operational involvement, but would you be willing to monitor progress from the command center? Your ability to assess environmental adaptation in real time could be valuable. Elena considered the request. 3 weeks ago, she would have refused immediately, maintaining the clear boundary between her past and present. But the lines had blurred beyond recovery now. Her expertise was actively shaping an operation that would place both operators and hostages at risk. I'll monitor from the command center, she agreed. The operation unfolded with a precision that validated Elena's approach. Using maintenance access points and movement patterns she had identified, the extraction team established presence throughout the facility before the opposition realized the intervention had begun. By the time direct contact became necessary, the operators held decisive positional advantage, neutralizing threats with minimal force and extracting both hostages without casualties. From the command center, Elena watched the operation progress through multiple camera feeds and communication channels. Her assessment provided real-time guidance as environmental conditions shifted, identifying adaptive pathways that conventional tactical oversight might have missed. Remarkable efficiency, Commander Reeves commented as the team reported successful extraction, minimal engagement, maximum effectiveness. Different problems require different solutions, Elena replied. Her focus still on the monitoring screens as the team executed their withdrawal. 3 days later, with the Miramar situation resolved and the training program entering its final week, Commander Blackwood requested a meeting with Elena in her office. The formal job offer folder sat on the desk between them. Your contribution to the Miramar extraction was cited specifically in the after-action review, Blackwood said. The approach you developed likely prevented casualties on both sides. Elena acknowledged this with a slight nod, but remained silent. The offer remains open, Blackwood continued, tapping the folder. Special Advisor to Naval Special Warfare. Training Command. Developing programs that translate your expertise into transferable methodologies. Elena studied the folder without reaching for it. I left that world for a reason, Commander. I know. You wanted simplicity. Clear problems. With clear solutions. Blackwood leaned forward slightly. But I think you've discovered that some complex problems are worth solving, despite the ambiguity they entail. For several moments, Elena said nothing, her thoughts turning to the past month's evolution. From the maintenance technician whose tattoo had caught Commander Reeves, attention to the tactical advisor whose insights had directly impacted a high-stakes operation. From invisibility to visibility, from simplicity to complexity. The operators you've trained, Blackwood added, they're already implementing your methodologies in their planning. Lieutenant Kehoe has requested permission to develop a specialized module based on your environmental adaptation techniques. Elena finally reached for the folder, opening it to review the position details. I have conditions. Name them. I maintain civilian status. No return to active duty or operational deployment. Elena met Blackwood's gaze directly. "And I want input on how the Ghost Program methodologies are framed and presented. They need to be understood as complementary to conventional tactics, not replacements." "Reasonable terms," Blackwood agreed. "Anything else?" Elena closed the folder. "I want access to the other Ghost Program veterans. There are 22 others who carried similar tattoos. Their experiences and insights would be valuable for a comprehensive training approach." Blackwood's expression registered momentary surprise. That would require significant clearance adjustments and locating personnel who may prefer to remain disconnected from their previous service. "If you want to preserve the knowledge, you need more than one perspective." Elena's tone was matter-of-fact. "I can teach what I know, but it's only one operational viewpoint. The program's value came from our collective expertise." Later that afternoon, Elena found herself back at the training facility, observing the final exercise of the current operator group. From the control room, she watched as they moved through environmental challenges that would have stymied them completely 3 weeks earlier. Their adaptation was evident, not just in tactical approaches, but in fundamental awareness of how environment shaped operational parameters. Lieutenant Kehoe joined her, having completed his part in the exercise. "They're getting it," he observed. "Not just following instructions, but internalizing the principles." "That's the goal," Elena replied. "Not to create a new procedure manual, but to change how they perceive operational environments." "I heard you accepted the advisor position," Kehoe said. "Does that mean the maintenance technician is retiring permanently?" Elena watched the monitors as the operators navigated a particularly challenging scenario she had designed. "Not retiring. Evolving. Some problems are worth the complexity they entail." As the exercise concluded, the operators gathered in the debriefing room where Elena had once been viewed with skepticism and dismissal. Now they listened attentively as she analyzed their performance, identifying both successes and opportunities for improvement. Chief Donovan, who had been the most resistant initially, approached her after the session. "Never thought I'd say this, but you've changed how I think about tactical problems. Not just for this specific training, but fundamentally." "That's the highest form of operational adaptation," Elena replied. "When the change isn't just in procedure, but in perspective." That evening, Elena stood at her usual spot on the secluded beach, watching the sunset over the Pacific. The past month had transformed her life in ways she couldn't have anticipated when Commander Reeves first recognized her tattoo. The carefully constructed anonymity was gone, replaced by a new identity that integrated rather than separated her. Past and present, she reached up, touching the outline of the tattoo at the nape of her neck, the modified Trident with the Skunk Works insignia that had once marked her as part of a program that officially never existed. For years, she had kept it carefully hidden, a reminder of operations and decisions that carried complexity she had chosen to leave behind. Now it represented something different, not just her past service, but her current purpose: teaching others to navigate the increasingly complex environments where conventional approaches failed, translating hard-won expertise into methodologies that might save lives in a changing operational landscape. That the maintenance technician had found comfort in simplicity, in problems with clear solutions and immediate verification. But Elena Vasquez, former Ghost Program operator and newly appointed special advisor to Naval Special Warfare Training, had discovered something more valuable: the opportunity to ensure that knowledge gained through classified operations wouldn't disappear as operational realities evolved. The tattoo that had once been carefully hidden was now a teaching tool, a symbol of expertise that commanded respect from the very operators who had initially dismissed her. The mark that identified her as someone who understood how to function effectively when everything worked against you, when standard approaches failed, when survival required adaptation rather than force. As darkness fell over the beach, Elena turned back toward the base, her steps purposeful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, developing comprehensive training programs, locating former Ghost program operators, translating classified methodologies into transferable knowledge, complex problems without simple solutions or immediate verification of success. But for the first time in years, complexity felt like an opportunity rather than a burden. An opportunity to ensure that the lessons learned through classified programs wouldn't be lost to changing politics or bureaucratic decisions. An opportunity to prepare the next generation of operators for environments that traditional training couldn't anticipate. The maintenance technician had vanished, but something more valuable had taken her place, an instructor whose knowledge might make the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death, between operators who could adapt to changing environments and those constrained by conventional thinking. The tattoo that had once marked her as part of a classified past now identified her as someone with a purposeful future, one where invisibility gave way to recognition, where complexity became an asset rather than something to avoid, and where expertise gained through classified operations found new life in the operators she would train. 6 months later, Elena stood at attention as the graduating class of the Naval Special Warfare's first Environmental Adaptation Specialty course received their certificates. Among them was Lieutenant Kehoe, now an instructor himself, preparing to take these methodologies to field units worldwide. "The tattoo that once marked us as ghosts," Elena told the assembled operators, "now serves as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force isn't strength or technology, but perspective, the ability to see pathways where others see obstacles." After the ceremony, a young female lieutenant approached her. "Ma'am, is it true you've located 15 other Ghost program veterans who've joined the training initiative?" Elena nodded. Knowledge preserved is lives saved. Some burdens are meant to be shared. As the lieutenant departed, Elena caught sight of her reflection in a nearby window, no longer the invisible maintenance technician, but a woman whose hidden expertise had found its purpose. The tattoo at her nape, once carefully concealed, now visible above her collar as a badge of honor rather than a secret to protect. Some ghosts, she realized, weren't meant to remain hidden forever. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit subscribe and join our channel for more hidden stories of extraordinary courage and unexpected heroes. Have you ever noticed someone whose quiet competence hinted at a remarkable past? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Next week, the janitor who saved a hospital during Hurricane Katrina without anyone knowing.